This episode is brought to you by Prime Video. In the small town of Holland, Michigan, nothing is ever what it seems. Behind the tulip festivals and pretty houses lay dark secrets that threaten to tear a marriage apart. Nicole Kidman stars in this darkly twisted thriller about a wife and mother whose quest to uncover her husband's secrets may get her more than she bargained for. Holland, streaming on Prime Video March 27th.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength, Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner, by knockout, is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Hey, what's up? It's Wanda Sykes. I'm here to remind you about something super important, getting your breast screened. Because trust me, your breast health should be a priority. Early detection for breast cancer can change the game, which is why you should visit yourattentionplease.com to learn more. And do me a favor, if you've already had a breast cancer screening, remind your friends and family to visit yourattentionplease.com too. We gotta look out for our girls.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Hey guys, this is Daniel. I've just recorded an interview with Marshall Garvey, a book about the 1985 World Series. You'll hear that right now, but after the end of that, stick around and I'm going to talk a little bit about current Cardinal events. So stick with me.
At the Musial with Alan and Daniel, we'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me in Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shopta at C70. Joining me this week, we're going to kind of take a little bit of a break from our normal Cardinal-centric what's going on in Jupiter Fields to talk with Marshall Garvey. He is the author of Interstate 85, a book on the 1985 World Series. Marshall, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, as I asked you just a few minutes ago, you're out in California. So what gave you the impetus to write about a series set deep in the heartland?
Well, I conceived the book a month into quarantine 5 years ago in 2020. A friend of mine, Jonathan Daniel, was working on a book about the 1982 World Series, of course, between the Cardinals and Brewers. So on a daily jog on April 15th, 2020, I went on a train of thought stemming from that, and I thought about 85, and it just hit me like, no one's really written about 1985 at length. And it's just been really overlooked for a long time. Obviously, the thing that people talk about most is the Don Denkinger call. But I had this feeling like there's more to this World Series than just that one call. There's great stories about the Royals, the Cardinals, and Denkinger himself. So long story short, my instincts turned out to be very true, and this book paints a much deeper portrait of the I-70 series that I think everyone will enjoy.
Was you mentioned the book on the 82 World Series? Was that the Sud Series book?
That's the one. Yep.
Okay, yes, I've read that one as well, which is a very good read also, and something that people should check out as well. But we'll put that to the side for the moment. You're right. 85 does have Dinkinger as the highlight, and I've gotten about 100 or so pages into the book, so I haven't gotten that far yet. We've just been introduced to him, but how hard was it to try to not make that the focal point of the book?
Um, it actually wasn't too hard because of the way I structured the book. First of all, this isn't a royal centric book. The Royals and Cardinals
Mhm.
are chronicled in equal proportion. I've got, chapter one traces the history of both clubs leading up to 85. Then there's a couple chapters on the regular season, and then a chapter about the playoffs, Cardinals versus Dodgers,
Mhm.
Royals versus Blue Jays. And then after the 85 series, I traced where the Royals and Cardinals went. So when I do get to the Dinginger call, like I go in depth, I give it the detail that it warrants, but making this book bigger than that wasn't too hard, especially because of all the interviews I got, including 7 of the 1985 Cardinals. So yeah,
Yeah,
making this big picture was a lot of fun.
I would say that it is interesting. I can just see even in the third that I've read how many people you've had a chance to talk to. How did you manage to wrangle so many people that were involved in this?
Um, it was a pretty. It would differ from person to person. Some were really easy, like I've been Facebook friends with Jim Sundberg for a long time, so that was just like instant.
Mhm.
Um, Others would require like none of them were really too hard to get, but it would just take a little bit of networking. Like some people I'd have to contact, like a family member, like a son or or a spouse or what have you. Frank White, Royal second baseman, he's a politician in Kansas City, so I filled out a whole form on the Jackson County website. It would just I just kept finding new ways to get through to different subjects, but it honestly wasn't too hard, and every single person that talked was excited to talk, and that was really refreshing. There wasn't any like, oh, I just want to get this interview over with. Everyone was really excited to share their stories.
Which is much more helpful for you, especially when you're trying to write the book. You were also very timely on a few. I noticed in reading your introduction that a number, or at least a couple that you had interviewed, had passed on before they had got the book out.
Oh yeah. Royals reliever Joe Beckwith, he died just 2 weeks after I talked to him. He had colon
Mm.
cancer, and I caught him just in time. And I think about that a lot, how fortunate I was. And Dinkinger himself, I interviewed him on Valentine's Day 2021, and he passed away 2 years later in May of 2023. So it's very fortunate to get that. I had even heard from someone that apparently it wasn't too easy to get him to sit down for an interview. So I was all the more grateful I got him.
Yeah, I imagine he got tired of answering some of those questions after a while, but it is now 40 years, and that puts a lot of things in perspective. I assume that when you got a chance to talk to some of these players, that series may meant something different to them now than it did when they were in the heat of the moment.
Yeah, no, and definitely like for some players, like perspectives have changed. Like the first Cardinal I talked to was Ricky Horton, like, and he told me like he looks back on it, in a pretty even keeled way. Obviously helped he got a ring with the Dodgers in '88, but he said like Royals manager Dick Howser dying of cancer a couple years later helped give him closure too. Jeff Lottie, another 85 reliever, said that his career didn't last that long, so he got a ring in '82, and he was on the losing side in '85, and he said he was just happy to be there no matter what. So I thought the Cardinals and everyone had some really unique perspectives on what that series means to them now.
Yeah, it is an interesting one to look back on. 85 has a mystique for Cardinals and Cardinals fans, even though they didn't win that series, mostly probably because they feel like they should have won that series. But also, I mean, when you've got a summer of Vincent Van Gogh and Ozzie Smith and Willie McGee slapping the ball around and running like crazy, that's going to capture the imagination of a fan base, especially the younger part of the fan base.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and that's what I learned to appreciate about the 85 Cardinals while I researched this book. And of course, getting to talk to a few of them was like, I get that they're, even in the long history of the Cardinals, you've got 11 championship teams, plenty of winning teams, but that 85 team really does hold a unique sway in Cardinal lore. And I get that. It was a lovable team, it was a very magical, fundamentally sound team. And like you said, yeah, that was a great summer, of course, with "The Heat Is On" by Glenn Fry as
Hmm.
the anthem. Basically, once they hit their stride to start June, they really pulled away, and of course had that great rivalry with the Mets, which I detail a lot in the book.
Yeah, that rivalry with the Mets from at least from '85 to '87 or '88, and probably more than that, could probably a book in of itself of the way they went back and forth over those few years. Um, but yeah, I mean, I was 10 that year, not living. I was living here in Arkansas like I am now, and so it was, far flung. I just vaguely remember a little bits about it, but I would be very interested to know because I have a feeling that 85 team might, in some people's minds, outrank even the 82 team that did win the World Series. It had its cachet from breaking that drought from '68. But like I said, that something about that '85 team that even stands out even more than the '87 team, which was very similar and yet had the same kind of went to the World Series, but just didn't have the same cachet as '85.
I think that's honestly pretty accurate. I mean, the 85 Cardinals, they won 101 games. If I'm not mistaken, I believe that's a full 9 more wins than the 82 team. It was the
Mhm.
first time they had broken the 100 win mark since the 1967 Alberto squad. Yeah, they were definitely the best Cardinal team of that decade. It was a winning decade overall, and honestly the best Cardinals team for a very long stretch. Yeah, then of course in the 2000s you'd have a stretch of super teams like the 2004 team. But yeah, the 85 team definitely, even if they didn't finish the job in the World Series, I'd still think it was a great season. And worth noting that they exceeded expectations in some eyes. Both Sporting News and Sport Magazine picked the Cardinals to finish last in the NL East in '85.
Hmm.
Though I think largely due to the seemingly weak off season they had, when in reality, yeah, the moves they made set up a great season.
Yeah, well, we know a little about week off seasons, but we're not going to talk about the current Cardinals
Yeah,
right now.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So what did you learn? Let's just take it away from the Cardinals for a little bit because I know we're going to talk a lot about them, but obviously the Royals did win that World Series and they did have quite the run. And I think for a lot of us that maybe came of age, especially after that series, the Royals are this also ran that win a World Series every 30 years or something like that. But they were really a kind of maybe a little bit at the end of their um, not really dynasty, but at least the powerhouse years of the Royals' history.
Yes, yeah. '85 was the capstone to a whole decade of success that started with their first playoff appearance in 1976. And yeah, I got to learn and appreciate a lot about Royals history. And at the time, I don't think anyone could have imagined, especially given how young their pitching staff was and how good that pitching
Mhm.
staff was in '85, that if anyone told you, oh, yeah, the Royals won't be in the playoffs for another 29 years, no one would have believed you. But as we know, the dark times came in the '90s and 2000s, so '85 would be it for a long time.
Yeah, yeah, it was quite a drought over there. So what what else did you learn maybe about the Royals that you were surprised at when you were doing the research on this?
I think I learned one thing was just how incredibly resilient that '85 team was. They came back from 7.5 games behind the Angels just to win the West, and then pulling off a 3-1 series comeback against the Blue Jays in the ALCS, and then against the Cardinals in the World Series. They're the first and only team to have two 3-1 comebacks in the same playoffs. I think another thing I learned too was um, just the proximity to the Cardinals in some ways. I emphasize in the book as the season went on, it seemed like the Royals and Cardinals started to mirror each other in certain ways, including clinching both the division and pennant on the same day. Um,
Yeah.
and of course, also that all this was made possible by Whitey Herzog being fired by the Royals in '79, and then the Cardinals scooped him up in 1980. So I always thought that in particular, learning to appreciate the success Whitey Herzog had, and I think his firing, was very questionable, but obviously very much to the Cardinals' benefit.
Well, and then you have the Lonnie Smith connection, which is kind of, as you note in the book, the first player to face a team that he had been playing for earlier that year in a World Series. That had to, I know he kind of passed it off, but that still had to be a little bit strange for Lonnie Smith.
It had to be. Yeah, no, that was yeah, I talked about that in the book. That's definitely an interesting fact. And yeah, he was traded from the Cardinals to the Royals in May, and it really was just a result of Vince Coleman's emergence, because now Coleman's the everyday starting left fielder, and you've got Willie McGee is blossoming in center. He wins MVP. You got a good tandem of Andy Van Slyke and Tito Landrum. Lonnie Smith's not going to be a backup, so it really was a necessary trade, and the Royals needed Lonnie too, because their offense in '85 was not that good. So they needed another spark atop the lineup.
Yeah, and you mentioned Tito Landrum was interesting. We talked about him last week on the show because my guest Dane Perry was pointing out underrated Cardinals, and a guy that he had liked was Tito, and of course I'd seen you writing about him in the book. It was, he came in at the right time, in a bad situation with Coleman going down with a tarp injury, but he made the most of it.
He really did. Well, and it really wasn't too surprising, because he had already got a clutch home run to help the Orioles win the pennant just 2 years before in '83, and especially for him to be the hero in the NLCS, and then he played brilliantly in the I-70 World Series, which was poignant because he's a native of Missouri by way of Joplin, even though he was a military brat. He grew up around the world, but yeah, Tito Landrum is definitely one of the great, unexpected heroes. And maybe if the Cardinals had won, maybe a good chance he could have been a World Series MVP, but we'll never know.
No, no. And I also like the anecdote when you're talking about the Joplins. It was Darryl Porter who said it may be
Yep.
the first World Series where a guy could sleep in his own bed the whole series,
I love,
having a having
yep.
a home there and having a home in St. Louis.
Yeah, I loved that quote. Yeah. Yeah, that's really, and that's wild that both he and Tito Landrum would both be not just from Missouri, but Joplin specifically. Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah, and it is weird a little bit in that day. I mean, obviously back in the 30s or 40s, whenever teams kind of recruited from their backyards, as it were, that wouldn't have been maybe as surprising. But in today's game, or even then with the draft and everything like that, it's surprising to have people that are coming right from there, two guys, and you're right. The connections between these two teams were very, I don't know, I don't want to say eerie, but a little bit strange. I mean, to have Herzog, to have Porter, to have Smith, to have Org, so many people that played on both sides, and not just, hey, they played there 10 years ago, they played there 2 or 3 years ago, or in Lonnie Smith's case, a few months ago. That really kind of, you would think that would heighten the, I don't want to say tension, but maybe that is the right word for it, between the teams in the series.
Definitely, yeah. I'm not even sure if it was so much like tension between the teams. Maybe it heightened it between the cities. I am aware
Mhm.
that yeah, even as a Californian, I've gotten a good feeling for the Kansas City St. Louis rivalry, and I talk about that in the book too. Maybe kind of added dimensions to that, but it seems like the relations between the teams were pretty cordial. But yeah, no, it's true. That's a really good point, that it wasn't just that they shared these players, period. It's that they were so recent. You could also add Jamie Quirk, Royals
Mhm.
backup catcher. He was a Cardinal in '83. Steve Braun, Cardinals backup, he was with the Royals in 1980, or a couple years, I think, including part of 1980. So yeah, that degree of cross pollination, to me, that just kind of shows it was meant to be. Like, they were meant to face each other in that year specifically.
Yeah. And I mean, I can, of course, after the series, a number of years after, maybe one of the signature Royals in Dan Quisenberry comes across the state and finishes his career in St. Louis, which was I always enjoyed Quisenberry. Of course, the sidearm is going to stand out in the quips as well. So to have him wear the Cardinal red for a little while was fun.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, Quiz was great. Taken from us far too soon, but yeah, very
Yeah.
fun player. Like I said, I love the sidearm delivery. Got a lot of his fun, poetic quotes and quips in the book. Yeah, Quiz was great. I'm glad you Cardinals fans got to have him for a short time. But Ricky Horton said he loved having him as a teammate, especially.
I'm not sure there's anybody that Ricky Horton doesn't like. So let's put it that way. Of course, we get Ricky on the radio constantly now. He's as his job, and he is one of the more optimistic people out there, I think, when it comes to anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not surprised he was one of your first interviews. I imagine, like I said, he enjoys talking to anybody, and to be able to chance to relive some of the highlights that he had. I imagine he had a lot of fun with that.
Oh, he did. Yeah, Rick was definitely one of the most important interviews, not just because he was my first Cardinal, but because he's an announcer. He's got a great storytelling proclivity. I just figured he'll set the tone for the Cardinal half of the project. I interviewed him in summer of 2021. I called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes,
Mm.
interestingly headquartered just by Kauffman Stadium, and got his email address. And yeah, we had an absolute blast talking. Told a lot of great stories, especially one if you've already read it in chapter 4, his story of where he was when Jack Clark hit the home run against the Dodgers. I loved that. Yeah, Rick. Rick is terrific. It was really great to get a hold of him, and I had a great time talking. Like I said, all my interview subjects were great, and the Cardinals especially made for unique perspectives. I talked to Ricky Horton, just to capture it all. To Ricky Horton, Jeff Lottie, Ken Daly, Kurt Kepshire, Ozzie Smith, Brian Harper, and Andy Van Slyke. So those were all a blast.
I mean, and when you can add a Hall of Famer into your list of people I've talked to, you're doing pretty well. I know that Ozzy is, very much a face of the organization and everything like that, but it had to be a little bit very special to get a chance to sit down and talk to him about this, especially when you're talking to him about the Go Crazy home run.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was yeah. Talking to Ozzy was great. That was set up by his agent Debbie Denler. And I talked to George Brett too. So I got two Hall of Famers
Yeah.
in this book. But talking to Ozzy was just dream come true. And him describing the Go Crazy home run, and not just that he was proud of it, but the fact that he hit that home run while playing through the wake of a rotator cuff injury. He said that being able to
Mhm.
keep playing after that injury was the greatest accomplishment of his career. And of course Jeff Lottie was the winning pitcher of the Ozzie Smith Go Crazy home run, so I love getting his side of that equation too.
Yeah. Well, and it was, and I think, again, as somebody that hasn't necessarily looked at it as much in the close up, to realize quite how much Ozzy took care of Niedenfuhrer over the last 2 hit that home run, then almost does it again, hits a triple, and then walks in front of Clark, and is a part of all that. It's not the person you would think would be bedeviling a late inning pitcher for the Dodgers.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the home run was absolutely shocking. A great quote, one of my favorite interview quotes. When I interviewed Andy Van Slyke and I asked for his reaction on the Go Crazy home run, Andy just said to me, he was just like, disbelief. I mean, last person you'd pick to win a game with a home run is Ozzie Smith. I'd have picked a big old 40-year-old usher in the stands who would have had a better chance. And I just burst out laughing when he said that. But yeah, Ozzy had a really good year, a solid year. He
Mhm.
wasn't a power hitter, but he had a strong year offensively in 85. And you're right. Yeah, the triple in game 6 of the NLCS is very underrated. It tied the game, and it ultimately helped set the stage for the Jack Clark home run, which of course he scored on. So yeah, Ozzy won NLCS MVP. So yeah, you always think of him for his glove, but he really, batting wise, he really showed up when it mattered in that NLCS, and that was huge.
Yeah. And before we leave the NLCS, I do think you kind of try to give some thought to why Tommy Lasorda didn't walk Jack Clark, but it's still amazing that he didn't. I mean, and granted, that game is a little bit different than today's game, but I just can't imagine that happening in a situation like that anymore.
No, and I think it was Lasorda, and Lasorda tended to be a pretty sound in-game strategist. I don't know why he did that. You're right. If you did it analytically today, you would be like, all right, you take your chances with Brian Harper,
Mhm.
who's not as likely to hit home run or this and that. You wouldn't even need analytics. You could just kind of see it logically. Clark had struck out in the seventh, but the reality is Niedenfuer has pitched a lot. Clark's a good, Clark is always a home run threat. I don't know. Maybe
Mhm.
Lasorda just got emotional. Maybe he just got a little cocky, and the Dodgers paid the price for it, to say the least.
I don't know because you're right. That was the one guy. I mean, some other people could maybe hit a home run, but the only guy you would expect to hit a home run is Jack Clark in that lineup, and to give him the opportunity is an interesting one, but one that the Cardinals have had some success with the Dodgers in the postseason, and it just kind of started there, perhaps, and we'll take it for sure.
Indeed.
Um, so what I mean, it was your stories. I mean, again, I'm only getting into game two, but the stories leading up to the World Series about the towns that were split down the middle and the fraternity houses that were doing the same. It was really interesting to hear that, and it didn't sound like it was a bitter type of split, right? It was a very friendly, you know, you're on that side, I'm on this side, and we're, even though we're friends, we're gonna kinda root against each other for a while.
Yes, exactly. I think it was friendly. I don't think it was like it's like a ferocious hate fest or anything. But while it was friendly, I think it was still passionate.
Mhm,
When I described those towns, hanging on every pitch, or how they split along Royal or Cardinal allegiances, it just showed how much the World Series and both teams mean to the whole state. It wasn't just Kansas City and St. Louis. Everyone, even in the most remote, unincorporated towns, were tuned in and just living and dying with every moment. And I thought that was really moving. I that was one of my hopes with the book, was to not just, the primary thing is, get interviews, get great stories from players and family members and Denkinger and whatnot. But I also wanted to fill in the provincial theater, that whole week where Missouri was the baseball capital of the world. And yeah, that was some of my favorite research to do, combing through newspapers to find those stories.
yeah, and then, I mean, you kind of I'm sure the media wasn't necessarily thrilled with that idea. I love the stories of the Missouri senators talking about having to go basically slum it in Missouri for a while instead of having a World Series in New York, where they were all comfortable. But yeah, I just think that was a very interesting look because the TV market didn't like it. I'm sure because it's Missouri, although it didn't matter as much probably then, right? Because the World Series, people were going to watch it, not as much like it is today, where it really kind of needs the big markets to be successful. Back in the '80s, you were watching the World Series, no matter who was in it.
It's so funny you say that. Not only are you absolutely right about that, but I've actually been thinking that to myself, because I quote, some bi-coastal media who were like belittling the series, like, oh, no one knows what a show me state is. Like, oh gosh,
Mhm,
both of these teams were so boring. But like, I checked the ratings for like, the total national ratings for Game Six. It was like still like 34 million something people watching. Yeah,
mhm.
I think it's just that baseball was a lot more popular then. And then, like, you're right, now you probably really do need more of the big markets. You look at the low viewership for the 2023 World Series between the Rangers and Diamondbacks, and then how much it boosted for Yankees Dodgers last year. So yeah, like, for all the wrangling over it's all in Missouri, I think baseball's overall popularity meant there were more eyes on it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I mean, it didn't have, even though, football and basketball were going on, I thought it was very interesting. I did not know about the fact that the Kings had just left Kansas City and were in fact about to, have their debut in the middle of this series. Those sports just didn't have the grasp on the culture, especially football, that it does now, right? I mean, now you can't do anything in the fall basically because there's a football game on somewhere and that's a significant competition.
Absolutely. Well, and like I mentioned in the intro of the book, just what a huge and revolutionary year 85 was for all sports,
Hmm.
that's when NBA is just really starting to gain its bearings because Michael Jordan's rookie of the year that year. But NBA isn't as popular then like as it is now. So you're right. Yeah. Football and NBA weren't as omnipresent. So yeah, baseball was still, I think, kind of ahead of the pack back then.
Yeah, he did a really good job of pointing out just how defining 1985 is. I think honestly, especially with the examples that you used and things, it really feels like when we talk about the 80s, here, decades past, most of the examples we have almost come from 1985, right there in the middle of the decade. It seems to be like the high watermark, perhaps, of what we would consider the 80s culture.
I agree, and that's basically what I insinuate in the introduction. Like pretty much all the
Mhm.
defining music, cultural moments, social world history events of the '80s, and especially sports. Like the world that we live in today, and especially the sports world we live in today, started in 1985 and emerged then. So the fact that this underrated World Series happened in the midst of that just makes it all the sweeter.
So, like I said, I'm about in game two. I haven't gotten to the talk of game six. You've done your interviews and everything. How did that how did that interview with Don Dinkinger go? I mean, obviously it wasn't contentious or anything, but how did he look at that number of years and how it has affected his life going forward?
Oh, well, he was very gracious. So I interviewed him on Valentine's Day 2021. He was joined by his wife Gail and two of their daughters, Denise and Dana. And I actually really tried to ask just kind of different questions. I didn't. I still asked about the
Mhm.
call, but I made it clear I wanted to ask. Like, I asked him, like, how did he meet Gail? You know, who he ended up being married to for
Right.
60 years. I asked him, like, how'd you get into umpiring? I also asked him about umpiring the 1991 World Series, which I detail his efforts in that in chapter 11. But as far as the call, I don't think he actually ever honestly got sick of talking about it. He learned to embrace it. He would always talk about it, when asked. He would sign memorabilia, photos of it. He'd sign like oops next to his signature. It was gracious. And, reality is the call does not define him as an umpire and certainly not as a person. But the way that he learned to live with it, I think, is pretty admirable. And I capture that in the book. But yeah, when we talked about the call, like he did describe, like he vividly described going to the umpire's dressing room after Game 6. Commissioner Peter Uberoth is standing there, arms folded, and Denkinger asked, like, "Did I get the call?" And Uberoth just shakes his head and says no. And Denkinger said, like, he just felt sick to his stomach that he got it wrong. But
Mhm.
yeah, I just tried to, I filled most of that in with other research. When I talked to Don, I just wanted to make it kind of a different interview, and I think he picked up on that.
Yeah, and the fact that and I didn't really realize again, um, not following it, but that he had made it to the World Series again obviously shows that it wasn't, you know, not only was it not a defining call for him necessarily, like it changed everything, but it wasn't necessarily held against him. He still had to earn his way in there, and obviously he was doing a very good job if he got another World Series assignment.
Right. Exactly. And the 1991 World Series would be his fourth and final assignment, and he had lots of other like playoff assignments, and also had the luck of umpiring two perfect games. So, yeah, no,
Mm,
he definitely he had a terrific career that went from 1969 to 1998. Yeah, the call, obviously it's his most famous moment, but yeah, it's not like
right.
the one thing that he's notable for. Far from it.
And I doubt you asked it, or maybe you did, and, but I wonder how how he felt watching Jim Joyce, what, 10 years ago now? I don't know how long it is, probably longer than that, when he missed the call on, Galarraga's perfect game. Because it's not the same not the same thing, but it's close, right? I mean, it's still that impact that everybody's looking at you and everybody knows clearly that you've gotten it wrong, and it impacts history in one way or another. I do wonder how he would have reacted to seeing someone else on that kind of stage.
So I do mention that in chapter 11. I didn't ask Don himself about it, during my interview, but I quoted an interview with him in the New York Post, and
Ah,
he said like, yeah, with this in mind, maybe it could be time for instant replay, and that kind of sets the stage for the 2014 World Series between the Royals and Giants, where interestingly, not only do you have instant replay now, but it actually helped change the course of that series. This time, however, against the Royals.
well, it would have against the Royals in '85 too. So,
Yeah.
um, so you looked at it, and then Cardinal fans. I think some Cardinal fans want to blame Dinkinger for that series loss, which is overstating things. Because obviously there was a lot of things that happened after that. But if he gets that call right, do you think the Cardinals win that game?
Do you think they do? Again, I really don't think. Yeah, I do think it's not accurate to just single out the call as just the
Right.
one deciding thing. There was also a missed call in the bottom of the fourth that likely cost the Royals a run. So maybe if that had been
Mhm.
maybe that had gone right. Maybe the Royals go up 1-0, and maybe the lineup turns over differently. Obviously, if Dinkinger gets the call right, I do think the Cardinals win, but they still should. I do think they still should have been able to hang on and win that game. Ricky
Mhm.
Horton himself said that. He agreed with me on that. Like if the next play was Steve Balboni, he came up and he hit a very playable pop up in front of the Royals dugout, but Jack Clark and Daryl Porter misplayed it. I feel like if even just there, if Clark or Porter catches that, then they could put the Dankinger call behind them and then just kind of get back on track. So the Dankinger call,
Yeah.
obviously, there's and the Dankinger call is like there's no question it's terrible. It's not even close,
Mhm.
but I don't think it's the deciding thing. I do think the Cardinals should have held on and won that game. And even, they could have also closed it out in game 5 at Busch Stadium. And then of course you have game 7, which, they lost 11-0. So, they had a lot of chances beyond just before and after the call. And just didn't close it out.
Yeah, and it's kinda like, the Bartman game where, things just started to snowball. I mean, obviously, any one thing could have stopped that run for the Cubs and the Marlins, um, and, put the Cubs back on track, and thankfully it didn't. But it feels like that too, right? I mean, you're right, if they catch that pop-up, then and that call is kind of negated and everybody gets back to but that just added to maybe the pressure that went along with and the anger probably of, "We should have had this already."
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think there was also kind of the mental aspect. Andy Van Slyke felt like maybe there was an element of getting a little too far ahead. Like he thought that he
Mhm.
got too far ahead when they went up 1-0 on Brian Harper's pinch hit in the eighth. And, there were also moments during the games in St. Louis where fans were like selling merchandise already calling this is on the fans part, not on the players,
Right,
but some
right.
fans were selling merchandise like, oh, the Cardinals are World Series champions already. And Andy Van Slyke said to me, like, when you're at that level, you got to be in the moment. And if you get ahead of yourself, you're not going to like the results. So yeah, I think if obviously Dankinger makes the call right, but if they could just at least catch the Balboni pop up, then I think then maybe they get
Mhm.
their heads in. But you're right, like the plays, the momentum kept shifting. The miscues kept piling up, and it probably shook them up mentally. I think that's true.
I think since then the Cardinals have had such trouble when they've been up 3-1 that nobody would ever be making fan shirts saying World Series champions until Game 7 in those situations. The Cardinals, I feel like I've read, I have about half of them, half of the situations where somebody's come back 3-1 on them, and if it's not
Oh,
half, it sure feels like it.
oh yeah, well, because that would also include the 1968 World Series, the 1996 NLCS, and the 2012 NLCS. Yeah, yeah, you
Hmm.
definitely would. And it was and as far as getting ahead, with respect to the Royals, like the Royals were fresh off a 3-1 series comeback against the Blue
Right,
Jays,
right,
so you couldn't sleep on that.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's still rare, so I guess you could think, "Oh, it's not gonna happen twice," but you should
Right.
also think, "Well, they just did it, so maybe it will." So, uh,
Exactly.
I I don't know. Is there anything else you wanna tell us about the book about what how you put it together and things you learned or anything that just kinda stood out in your research?
There's so many great stories through interviews and secondary research. And so many great stories. Like I can see this book 5 years ago. The journey of it was really special, and I'm really grateful to have made so many cool connections with all these different players from both teams and Dankinger. I would say to all, among many other things, to all Cardinals fans, that knowing that Dankinger is a sore spot for many and that this was a big heartbreak, I do hope that you read this book because it's deeper than that. I present the '85 Cardinals as a special team that should be remembered, and just because they didn't win it all doesn't mean they can't stand the test of time. That they're not that they're anything less. They're a wonderful team, and I think you will appreciate how I did them justice in this book.
Yeah, and it's a team that should be. I need to look through, but I'm pretty sure we'll be honored this year in at Busch Stadium as the 40th anniversary comes along of this team, and it is something special. It's one of a team that has populated the Cardinals Hall of Fame quite a bit so far, so it's definitely a memorable team. Marshall, I know that you can buy it at Amazon because you can buy everything at Amazon, but are there other places that people can look for the book?
Oh, of course. You can buy it at Barnes and Noble, and basically just any major book retailer. Yeah, any major bookseller, you should be able to get it there. The book is out next week on opening day, March 27th, but you can pre-order now. And if anyone wants a personalized autograph copy, just let me know. You can find me on social media, any social media platform, or head to my writer's website, marshallpgarvey.com, and get a hold of me there. And like I said, can't wait for all you Cardinal fans and many others to read it.
Yep, it's so far so good, and I'm glad I've had a chance to get a little bit ahead of the line and get a chance to read some of it. Marshall, we thank you for joining us tonight, and look forward. Are you going to write another book anytime soon?
Funny you ask, this is my third published book, and all three were written in rapid succession. So I'm actually on a bit of a hiatus from writing books to focus on some other things in life. But I do have, whenever that hiatus is over, I've got a lot of great ideas for more books, including potentially a book about a specific Super Bowl. But that will be a story for another time. For now, it's all about '85.
That's right. Well, if Cardinals uh, baseball fits into any of your books in the future, we look forward to talking to you again for that. But until that future time, that's Marshall. I'm Daniel. Good night.
Meanwhile, in reading Lasorda talking about walk him and pitch to that blank Van Slyke. That's what he just muttered in the dugout. Do I walk him and pitch to that so-and-so? He's not going to walk him. It is Jack Clark and Tom Niedenfuhr going head-to-head, and the ball game on the line, and the crowd on its feet. One way or another, what a way to end. And he hits one to deep left field, and that one is gone.
And thanks again to Marshall for coming on and talking about the book. It has been a very good read so far, and I hope that if you were interested in the 1985 team, you should pick that up. Again, it's obviously not just completely focused on the Cardinals, but heavily focused, so I think that'll do if you can put up with the Royal talk as well. But it is a very good, very interesting read, and give it a check out on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. Being that he is out in California, and I believe a Dodgers fan, didn't feel like he probably wanted to spend a whole lot of time talking about whatever is going on for the Cardinals and their 26th man roster and other issues and things like that. So I'm going to do just a quick little bit here solo. So bear with me because you know how solo shows can go. They don't go well. But I'm going to hope that the interview counteracts this portion of it. Cardinals are just a couple of days out from finishing up their roster machinations and will have their 26-man roster. They've been told, Felix Fermin, that he will be the 26th man. Now we continue to wait and to see what they do with Victor Scott and how that all shakes out. And it just really feels like, even though Victor Scott has had probably the most impressive spring of anybody, right? I mean, overall, we have seen so many great things out of him, and in a different way than we saw last year. I mean, you know, I've made this point on here and on Gateway a number of times, right, that he had such a great spring last year, only to, you know, kind of stumble very, very much quickly as opening day rolled around. But, you know, Dane Perry wrote about it at his Birdie Work, which you should be subscribed to, about how the quality of his at-bats and quality of his results this spring are significantly different and significantly better than they were last year. So if you're looking at it as a competition, if you look at it in a vacuum, Victor Scott should be on this roster. That said, and we continue to reiterate, how do you make that work? And Dane had some good ideas about, you know, Donovan being the super utility guy and how that all could you know, him basically playing every day. You know, the Ben Zobrist model, right, that we continue to talk about, you know, plays every day, just in a different position every day. And maybe that means Nolan Arenado sits more than he usually does, but that's not a bad thing necessarily at Nolan's age and with the back issues that he's had in the past. To have a few more days off, not the worst thing. You know, even though the Cardinals are giving as much time as they can to people like Gorman and Walker and even Newbar, there are going to be some days off for those guys as well. So you have to figure that Donovan could find enough at bats, even if he's not stationed in left field every day. And so if he's not stationed in left field every day, you could put Lars Newbar out there and you could put Victor Scott in center. And you could use Michael Ciani as your fourth outfielder, and maybe that all works. And maybe that's the way the Cardinals will go. I don't know. I'm still of the opinion that they'll probably let him play in Memphis every day just to make sure that everything is good, right? There's not that rush. There's not that need to win a whole lot of games this year. We hope that they do. We want them to, but we've talked about it. It's not necessarily the sole focus. And so giving him a chance to, you know, completely, you know, get his feet under him, have all the confidence, be ready to go. And as soon as there's an injury, you know, and like Ben on Talking About Birds was saying this week, you know, in any injury in the infield and out of the outfield, you know, it's probably going to leave a domino effect that lets Victor Scott come up and play. I do feel like Michael Ciani has slipped down the roster, which is not a bad thing. In fact, it's what it should have, right? He needs to be a defensive outfielder that plays every once in a while. And, you know, that looks like the team, you know. I think the bench is a little bit better than it was last year, especially if you've got a guy like Luke and Baker on there, and you don't have, you know, three catchers, which the Cardinals have had in the past. I'm looking forward to see. I have a little bit more optimism that Ivan Herrera is going to get the majority of the playing time at catcher, but there are no guarantees on that. I think it is. We're kind of seeing what the offensive side of things looks like. The Cardinals are talking a lot about a 6-man rotation, though, now. Will that work? Will it not? Will they go that way? Who knows? I think that there's a lot to be said for the 6-man rotation, obviously. It gets a chance to make sure that Michael McGreevy gets to be on a regular rotation. Because I think that's really the only thing we're seeing, right? We're going to see, and we'll talk about Sonny Gray in a little bit, but Sonny Gray, Eric Fetty, Andre Palante, even though there's some concerns about him, especially this spring, Miles Michaelis, and likely Steven Matz. And then that would give McGreevy a chance to play. Now, the idea was also that it was going to be a swingman type of thing where he'd sometimes start and sometimes not. That needs to be Steven Matz, right? I mean, he's got the bullpen credentials. He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing. I let the young guys, especially in this season of development, let the young guys stay put. Let McGreevy have that spot. It's also possible that spot could go to Matthew Liberatore, although, you know, again, I'm a little bit hesitant on that just because we've seen the success he's had in the bullpen versus what he's done as a starter. That doesn't mean that he can't be a starter. He's had a very good spring. Both he and McGreevy both have. The only thing I worry a little bit about, one, if Sonny Gray is Sonny Gray, which is right now an if, but if he's what you think he's going to be, and the guy that you paid all this money to be the ace, much like when Adam Wainwright was here, he needs to pitch every fifth day. It doesn't matter if there's off days, doesn't matter whatever. He needs to pitch every fifth day. Now you can still run your, run your rotation around that. And it would give a couple of days off, extra days off here and there to all the pitchers, which is not a bad thing, because none of those pitchers do you necessarily want out there for 200 innings. Most of them aren't really conditioned for it, and the one that is not somebody you want out there for 200 innings. So I get that. But I wonder, we talk so much about baseball players and being creatures of habit and knowing that for pitchers, every fifth day they're going to take the ball. And they've got their routine of, 2 days after start they do this, and 3 days after start they do this, and all that. And I don't know how easy it is or how effective it would be to shift that to add a day in that. The spacing makes sense. The rest makes sense. You would think that would work. But baseball's weird, right? We talk about sometimes too much rest is not a good thing. One of the things we've talked about this new playoff system is the top seeds sit for a while, and we've seen them struggle somewhat. So, I don't know that that's enough to put the kibosh on a 6-man rotation or anything like that. I just think it's something to factor in, that the results may not be as strong and might be stronger. Especially, and it probably going to depend on the pitcher, right? I would be interested to see. I don't know that the Cardinals are going to go that way. Even with this talk of change and talk about doing things different, that still feels like a bit of a step. I'm not going to rule it out. And in fact, I'm recording this Friday night. It's very possible that I've missed something somewhere along the way, or before you hear this, they've changed their minds. They very well may go and say they're going to do that, at least to start the season. I don't know that it lasts terribly long. If there's an injury, are they going to keep the 6-man, but move Liberatore, say, into the rotation out of a bullpen spot that maybe he was doing well in? Do they have the arms to do that? You've got a Quinn Matthews sitting in Memphis, but I feel like it's still going to be a little bit of time before they bring him up. There's not that rush. And I do feel like, how does this work, right? Is promotion, demotion in the minor leagues or even up to the major leagues for these kind of guys a Chaim Bloom thing this year? Or is it still a John Mozeliak thing this year? Is it, if Mo wants to bring up Quinn Matthews because there's an injury and the Cardinals are 3 games out of first in middle of May, does he get to say that? Or does Chaim Bloom say, for development purposes, he needs to stay in Memphis for another 2-3 weeks? Who gets to make the final call when it comes to something like that? When you're talking about Fermin and Barrero and guys like that, I figure it doesn't matter as much. But when you're talking about a guy like Quinn Matthews, who could be here for quite some time, doesn't it make sense for Chaim Bloom to have the veto power on whether he's, or at least a final call on whether he's ready to make it to the major leagues? I don't know. And I have no idea, again, how that would work in the front office this year. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see, because there's going to be a temptation, I would think, for John Mozeliak, especially if the Cardinals get off to a strong start, to try to maybe be a bit aggressive so that, he can go out as a winner. And I don't think that it's a huge thing for Mo, but I think there's probably part of him that would like that, right? I mean, he's a competitor. He doesn't necessarily want that sour note like, Adam Wainwright and Yadier Molina wanted to go out on the high notes. People like that, Albert Pujols. I think Mo's the same way, right? He'd like to go out on a high note. I don't know that it overrides, the future of the organization, but it's going to be tempting if there's a opening and Quinn Matthews is looking sharp, and there should be a temptation to bring him up when maybe he should, maybe he shouldn't. I don't know. So I think that's something to watch, but we've kind of gotten away from the 6-man rotation type of thing. But, again, if there are injuries, I think you start tapping into that well pretty quickly. And then, shifting back to a 5-man, can you do that after 2 or 3 weeks, or 2 or 3, probably 2 or 3 weeks? Yes. If you get into June, can you shift back? Are the pitchers going to be able to return to those routines, especially after that? I don't know. And then, far be it for them to be 2 injuries, in the starting rotation, because that gets really into your depth, right? And in which case you may not have a choice but to call up a Quinn Matthews or to see if Lance Lynn is still available, since I just saw that Kyle Gibson got signed by the Orioles. Lance Lynn may be your only chance. Although I got to give a lot of credit to Jim Hayes, because it was just today that he put out screenshots of his new show that was going to have Lynn and Gibson, and then Gibson gets signed. So whatever cachet the cat has, that's impressive. But and then the bullpen, I don't think there's any really consideration about the bullpen. The only question is, where is Matthew Liberatore going to be? And then again, I guess maybe where is Michael McGreevy going to be in relation to that? I think we've seen the arms that have to look, but I don't think there's really any significant competition still out there. And obviously there are going to be some arms that go back and forth. Nick Anderson is going to be in Memphis, and we'll see if he gets a chance to come back up. I would like to see him. He obviously had a terrible spring. It'd be nice if he kind of regains some of his past. But, then again, he may be the one that gets injured at knowing his history too. So who knows? So the Cardinals are pretty close to where they're going to be opening day. But what's concerning, besides the fact that the Cardinals haven't sold all the tickets to opening day yet, is that Sonny Gray has not looked good at all this spring. Again, we know all the caveats. We know that we don't need to worry about spring training numbers. We know that this, that, and the other, right? But when your ace pitcher goes through spring and it doesn't have, I'm going to say this, but I want to double check it just a little bit, but does not have a game where he doesn't allow a run. In fact, he doesn't have a game where he didn't allow 3 or more runs, and he never pitched past the 4th inning. Well, or never pitched past the 5th inning. Never finished the 4th. And, some of these games, he was in and out, I think. It's not good, right? A 12.56 ERA. Again, take all the caveats. But there's a little bit of concern there. Now, he struck out 17 in 14 innings, so maybe we shouldn't be too concerned. I know that guy from Pitcher's List that was just on Nate from Pitcher's List, Nate Schwartz, who was just on Talking About Birds, has some indications that, he said he's not worried about Sonny Gray. Or he said he's slowly building to velocity. Sonny Gray didn't seem to really know why his velocity was low. So that's, I think, a little bit concerning. But, I think that's fair. But, yeah, man, 8 home runs in 14 innings. Gray struggled with home runs a bit last year. That was one of his only flaws. I hope, and I wouldn't be surprised, that we come in, end of April, mid-May, and we're like, man, remember when we were worried about Sonny Gray? I hope we're not sitting there end of April, beginning of May, saying, man, remember when Sonny Gray was pitching? There's no indication except for the fact that apparently he had an injury this offseason, took an injection. Everything's good now, but it took him longer to ramp up. That's at least the official line right now. And there's no reason to doubt it particularly. But it's still concerning. And I think that's going to be, look, we've always said if the Cardinals are going to have any chance of competing this year, it's because they're going to have to hit like their 90th percentile on almost everybody, and the rest of the division needs to be iffy. The Cubs being 0-2 has helped, right? It's nice for them to go over to Japan and lose 2 games and give the Cardinals a game cushion on them. But, right now, you really got to have Sonny Gray hitting that 90th percentile to have much of a chance. I mean, I can't imagine a path for this team that they're successful without Sonny Gray being successful, right? I mean, can you? I mean, I can't see how that would work. I mean, even if the other 4 are, supremely exceed expectations, their exceeding expectations is not as effective as Sonny Gray being slightly below expectations, right? So I don't know. I don't know how that works. And I'm hopeful that, again, it's a spring training artifact and we don't have to worry about it. But until we see him against the Twins and then against the Angels, I guess, in Busch, and if he's giving up home runs in Busch on those 2 games, I think there's some concern, knowing how Busch usually plays. I don't know. I hope that it's not a thing, but you don't usually go this late in spring with your number 1 not looking at least somewhat like a number 1. Cardinals are got Saturday and Sunday. I think, as I said, Matthew Liberatore is set to start on Sunday or tomorrow. No, Liberatore's starting tomorrow, which is an interesting thing. Although McGreevy pitched today and pitched very well, so maybe it is still a little bit of a last-minute competition. Fetty's going on Sunday, and then Palante is going for the Cardinals against the Redbirds on Monday, which I thought that game in Memphis was Tuesday. It's just a problem because if you're listening to this and still haven't done the Bomb Squad on Twitter, probably want to get those subscriptions in before Monday if you want to play in our special Bombs Away game. That's Cardinals and Redbirds. But anyway, I mean, here we are. This time next week we will have baseball, and in fact, next week's guest, assuming everything works out, is going to be Twins beat writer, which is weird to say, folks. Twins beat writer Matthew Leach is going to join us on Friday after opening day, and we'll get a chance to talk to him about, it's going to be, I'm looking forward to talking to Matthew about, because he was here, right? I mean, he was here in the later parts of the real part of the dynasty. Well, if you say he was here for 11, and to see what he thinks about the Cardinals then and now comparatively, it should be interesting, and I'm hopeful that we can make that work, because I think it could be a fun conversation to have. But yeah, it's amazing that we have gone this far. We've gotten to everything starting, the Bombs Away, the Card 6, everything that, I'm hopeful to do some more writing at the Substack as things go on. I'm going to get set up on FanDuel streaming this weekend, so we can see the ball games. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully it's a good season. A season that's going to be a lot of a lot of development, probably a lot of difference, a lot of tempered expectations. But it's 6 months of baseball, and that beats 6 months without baseball. So, you got Richard from Remembirds has got a blurb about Ozzie Smith here at the end of this deal. I think it's Ozzie. It's definitely about the 85 teams. I just realized I may be wrong. So you'll have to listen and see exactly what he's talking about. And you'll catch me on Gateway on Sunday, assuming David has somehow put the North Carolina loss behind him and can actually talk about something that's not basketball. But we look forward to that. Look forward to being again with you next week with Matthew Leach. But until then, for, well, me, good night.
Suter from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's a winner. That's a winner. A World Series winner for the Cardinals.
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and today I'm taking a look back at how Ozzie Smith signed a new contract, then homered in the Cardinals' 1985 home opener. Heading into the 1985 season, the St. Louis Cardinals were a team in transition. They had already traded Keith Hernandez to the Mets and lost Bruce Sutter to free agency. And now, with Ozzie Smith entering the final year of his contract, Cardinals fans feared that the Wizard might be next. Negotiations between Ozzie and the team had stalled, with reports indicating that the Cardinals and Smith were as much as $800,000 per year apart. Trade rumors swirled, linking him to the Dodgers, Yankees, Mets, and Pirates. Cardinals executive Fred Kuhlman even admitted, if we can't sign him, there's got to be some thought about trading him. As insurance, the Cardinals acquired shortstop Jose Oquendo from the Mets, providing the team with a backup shortstop who could inherit the starting job in case they parted ways with Ozzie. Meanwhile, Bob Forsch, once the team's ace, was trying to reclaim his form after a back injury in a rough 1984 season. He entered spring training as the team's fifth starter and struggled, losing his 4 exhibition starts. But on April 15th, both Smith and Forsch got the fresh start they needed. Coming off losses in 4 of their first 5 games, the Cardinals began the day with a press conference at Busch Stadium. Hours before its home opener against the Expos, the team announced that Ozzie had signed a 4-year, $8.7 million contract extension. The deal included a $700,000 signing bonus, a salary that would peak at $2.2 million per year, and primary consideration for an Anheuser-Busch wholesale ship. With that, the pressure was off and Ozzie was ready to perform. On the mound, Forsch looked like his old self. He retired the first 11 batters he faced, allowing just 1 run through 5 innings. In the bottom of the 5th, Tom Herr and Terry Pendleton each drove in runs to make it 3-1 St. Louis. In the 6th, Andy Van Slyke and Michael Valliere drove in runs to extend the lead to 5-1. Then in the 7th, Ozzie put an exclamation point on the night. The Wizard launched a solo home run, sending 42,986 fans into a frenzy. Quote, "The people here have always treated me and my family well," Ozzie said. "It makes you want to go out there and perform that much better for them." In the 9th, Forsch shut the door, retiring the final 3 Expos batters for his first complete game win in more than a year. As Whitey Herzog put it, quote, "We played good. God almighty, we played good." So that's the story of how Ozzie Smith locked in his future in St. Louis, then homered in the Cardinals' 1985 home opener. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. And thanks again, and go Cards.
Smith corks one into right down the line. It may go. Go crazy, folks. Go crazy. It's a home run, and the Cardinals have won the game by the score of 3-2 on